Hello and welcome to Model Minutes. This episode is a quick build of the Hawker Hurricane Mark 1 starter set from Airfix. Inside the set you get a couple of paints, a paintbrush, 4 sprues containing the main parts and 1 clear sprue containing the cockpit canopy. The first part was to create the internal wheel well assembly. These are quite small fiddly parts and need to be installed into the bottom wing section of the model. Also in the bottom wing part of the model is a clear part which I believe is a landing light. That needs to be glued in using some PVA or clear glue. The next step is to build all of the internal cockpit parts. These parts are very fiddly and require a bit of patience in order to get right. Next, cut out the main fuselage parts. You need to do this in order to install the cockpit. As this is a new tooling, there's more detail in these parts than in the previous version that I've built. Some of these parts even go inside the bottom of the wings. The next step is to build the propeller assembly. If you get this right and are careful with where you put the glue, you can make sure that the propeller spins. The inside of the aircraft can be painted using Humbrol 78. This was not included in the kit. I however used the enamel version, which I already had from a previous build. All internal parts, such as the cockpit and the wheel well, can be painted in this colour. When that is dry, you can then attach the upper and lower wing components. Some clothes pegs would be handy here to hold the parts together whilst the glue sets. Next, it's time to put the two fuselage halves together. If you've got your internal cockpit components right, the parts should go together with minimal fuss. When that's done, it's time to glue the fuselage onto the wings. This fits incredibly well due to the new tooling. All of the small parts can then be dry brushed with some Humbrol 11 to pick out the silver metallic elements. The next step is to cut out and install the tailplane. I decided to cut the elevators off of these parts so that I could reposition them in a more realistic pose. When the aircraft is sitting on the ground, there's no pilot inside with his hands on the control column. As a result, the elevators would droop. The rudder comes as a separate part and could also be attached in a more realistic position if the aircraft was in flight. However, as it was on the ground, I just left it facing rearwards. Other small parts, including the tail wheel and what I believe is a radiator, can be installed underneath. Next, it was time to use the Humbrol 90 acrylic that was included and paint the base of the model. When that was done, it was time to move on to the Battle of Britain colour scheme on the top of the wings. My basic philosophy is to work from the lightest paints to the darkest paints. When those paints are dry, I decided to install the landing gear. The instructions do state to install the landing gear earlier than this, but I wanted to do it after the paint was dry, so that I didn't end up smudging anything and having to paint around it. This stage is installing the engine exhausts. I had painted these separately using a brass colour. Here I am painting a gloss varnish over the areas where the decals were going to be applied. When that was dry, I soaked the decals in warm water, applied a little bit of setting solution to the aircraft and then push them into place using my finger and a paintbrush. The solution helps to make the decals sink into the model as if it had been painted on. A little trick I like to do for the under the wings is put 2 paint pots either side and then balance the aircraft on top. This helps prevent any damage to any of the parts on top of the aircraft. When all of that was dry, I then painted a matte varnish over the aircraft to give it a less shiny look. The last stage of construction was to install the canopy. This comes in 2 parts and I used PVA glue which wouldn't fog up the glass. I glued it so that it looked like it was open, ready for a pilot to climb in. The last step was to add a bit of weathering by making a dark acrylic wash. Acrylic was fine at this point because I'd already used an enamel to seal it. The wash was brushed all over and then dabbed off to dry. So here is the finished model. Retailing for about £10 as a starter set, it's a good build. The new tooling definitely leagues ahead of the old version that Airfix used to have to offer. As you can see in some of the pictures, I've added a bit of stretched sprue to represent the radio antenna on top of the aircraft. What do you think of this model? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video. See you all again next time.